What's going on, everybody? My name is Robbie, and you're watching Geek Level Asian. I'm not sitting in front of my desk. We're doing something a little different today. I'm out in Riverhead, New York, and we are at Zinn Records in front of a green screen, and I'm sitting here with my friend Nick.
Hi, everybody.
And we're going to talk about Stephen King's It, the new adaptation. Everyone's been freaking out about it. Came out on September 8th, so it's been maybe around a week. I've been reading a lot of stuff online. People really love it. Some people have different opinions about it. And we're going to be talking about things that we loved, things that we liked, things that maybe we wished maybe were a little different, because both of us have read the original novel.
Yes.
I read it when I was a lot younger. Nick read it how long ago?
2 months ago.
2 months ago, very recently. So you're going to be able to, call upon things that I might not be able to. And as a child reading that book, which you definitely shouldn't read that as a child, I might not even remember things correctly. So this is going to be really good.
Yeah, spoiler.
That being said, this video is going to be spoiler heavy. Spoiler heavy. We're going to talk about everything. So if you haven't seen the new movie yet, and you really want to be surprised by that experience, I would say don't watch this video. But if you've seen it, or if you haven't seen it but you want to watch the video anyway, I encourage you to do so.
Or if you haven't read the book, or if you haven't watched the miniseries, because we're going to talk about all of it.
Yeah, and that's, again, when it comes to my opinions about this new adaptation, a lot of it comes from things that I wanted to see. Let's talk about what we liked.
What we liked. First of all, my favorite, the highlight, I believe, is the cast of kids.
Great, of course.
I thought every one of them was chosen very well. Everyone put forth the performance very well. And they are really the best aspect of this movie. I don't think it's the most wonderful, perfect adaptation ever made, but I think for what they were trying to accomplish, they put forth a noble effort.
Okay.
Stephen King's It is a very challenging book to try to adapt into film form.
Very large novel. Yeah.
Very large novel with a lot of moving parts. And not just the main cast, but there's a lot of flashback history of the town of Derry.
Yeah, and I'd say that's even part of the, it's very hard to tell a story on film with so many flashbacks and things that are happening in congruence while you're reading it, but are actually happening at different times.
Yes. And that's another thing, too, because if you're unfamiliar with the story, you realize that it's two parallel time periods that we're talking about. And as you read the story in these two different eras, they're interwoven, where you're learning about the history of these people as they're recalling it in present time. So to tell that story on film is very difficult.
Yeah. And I think that the original, they tried to do that.
They tried.
They definitely tried to do that, because that's exactly how they filmed it, which worked, I would say, in the first part of that two-part made-for-television saga.
It worked better. It worked more in the first part.
It worked more in the first part. A lot of people have publicly stated, and I believe even the director, I think it was the director, stated that he didn't like the second part. My first opinion was this. Listen, coulrophobia, which is the fear of clowns, a lot of it, studies have been done stating that one of the reasons why people are afraid of clowns is a trust issue.
Okay.
You have this painted-on smile, but you really don't know who the person is. I don't know if that's where my issue with clowns comes from. I think it's more just visual. Maybe mentally it's more. I don't know that. But when I saw the picture, he looked obviously way more sinister, like an evil clown. And I think that disappointed me right from the start. Because Tim Curry, although Tim Curry was dressed more like a traditional clown, I would say.
Clown, yes.
I think he was, the fact that he looks like a nice clown, but, at the turn of the hat, whatever the saying is, he could just flip-flop and just become this really threatening, menacing entity. And it wasn't just the way he looked, it was his voice. The performance was just amazing. The reason why I think the original worked was because of his performance.
Okay. I happen to be one of the people that I don't love that old adaptation as much as others. But I also, I didn't see it till recently. I read the novel first, then I watched the miniseries, and then in anticipation of the movie. But I'm not one of those people that judges something harshly because it's old or anything like that. I went into this with an open mind, but some of it suffers from technological limitations at the time.
Absolutely.
Et cetera, et cetera. But if we're going to talk about performance, I love Tim Curry. I love Tim Curry. And I'm not saying that he did a bad job, but the interpretation I had of Pennywise in the novel did not translate for me in his performance. One of the reasons being he was a more traditional clown.
Yeah.
And he had a very a more friendly, approachable kind of voice. And I know he did have his turns, but I feel that in the novel that Pennywise, there was never an instant where he was approachable or friendly. Like even in the book, Pennywise is said to take the form of a clown to lure children in, but minus the character of Georgie, that never happened.
Yeah, no, you're right. You're absolutely right. And again, this is why I'm glad that we're doing this, because me, someone like me who's read the book a very long time ago, little descriptions like that, to be honest, I don't really remember all of them. I think I call to the original Tim Curry performance more than when it comes to descriptions of him, than I do with the book. It's more I call events. I call upon events, and we'll go into that. We'll go into all that stuff. That being said, we should probably talk about the fact that this movie has no flashbacks in it. They told the story in the point of view of the kids growing up in the 80s and having to deal with their personal problems, and that's what the novel was originally about. Everyone individually is going through something different, and they also have to deal with this clown entity trying to kill them also.
Yes.
As if life wasn't hard enough. But yeah, something that obviously the cast of the Losers Club I really liked. I do like the fact that they changed the time period. And I think that might only be because I loved Stranger Things so much.
Stranger Things is good.
I loved that a lot. And I grew up in that time period, so it was a little bit more maybe relatable. And I feel like seeing the thing, like the New Kids on the Block reference was hilarious. I loved that.
Yeah.
If you see the movie, I'm not going to spoil that for you. If you see the movie, that's really funny. But I really like that they changed the time period, because it also it gave different context and told the story in a way that I felt was more relatable to people who are experiencing it for the first time now, for a younger generation.
Okay. Yeah, I like this point. I like talking about the era change. I mean, coincidentally, just because it just works out that way, that this movie, that the adults of this will be in the present, that coincidentally going back 30 years is going to land us in the 80s.
Yeah.
Right? So that's just how it works out. But some of the complaints that I've heard people make about the movie is saying that it's too 80s nostalgic, and that is a detriment, and that it's I don't agree with that. They make the New Kids on the Block reference.
Yeah.
And aside from the occasional marquee on a theater.
Yeah.
Aside from that, I find the movie to be very timeless.
Yeah, it's not overtly 80s. It's definitely not.
No,
yeah,
it's
you're
very
right,
subtle.
You're right.
To the sense that if you told me it took place in the 60s, I could believe it.
Yeah, there would be certain scenes where I wouldn't know it's the 80s. That's definitely true.
And so I don't think that is a detriment to the movie, where some harsher detractors have said that was a negative.
It's funny because I'm also you're right. And it's funny because there are things that about the time period change that I think added a lot of positive things, but there is maybe one thing that I think was a detriment to me. Okay. The original Tim Curry adaptation that we saw and the novel are both overtly racist.
Yes.
And not that I'm overtly racist.
No.
That's not what I'm talking about. But the entire premise of Pennywise being, his being and who he is and what it is, it's not only this physical entity that can form as a clown and kill children, it's also the evil and everything that's wrong with Derry.
The town itself and the sickness of the town and the people that live in it.
And I feel like part of that, we kind of lost a little bit of that by not seeing the racism that exists. They definitely call upon it a little bit.
A little bit, but I was actually shocked when there were some encounters between Henry Bowers and Mike Hanlon.
Yeah.
And I was almost shocked that there was no N-bombs.
Yeah.
I was a little shocked about that.
And not that like, it's like, oh, well, I just really want to hear that word. It's more that it gives context to in the late in the late 50s, early 60s. It gives context to what the world was really about.
Yes.
And maybe not what the world was really about, but what was happening in the world.
Right.
And that added so much, it just added this really looming evil presence in the town of Derry. Just knowing that, the movie is about, that movie in the book, there's a scary clown in it, but at the same time, there was a lot of things that were really just terrible that were going on, and were affecting people in different ways.
Yes.
And in this particular adaptation, the 2017 adaptation, Henry still picks on Mike a lot.
Right.
And he singles him out in different situations, but for people who are not familiar with the source material, they might not really understand why.
No, and I think that a negative for me for this was like the changing of Mike Hanlon's backstory. Yeah, Mike Hanlon's backstory from the novel was his father was a farmer. They come from a loving family. The bully in the novel, Henry Bowers, his family racists. They believe that, just throwing it out there, racist.
Yeah.
But the Bowers family is not doing as well, and they are blaming the Hanlon family from taking away business. And Henry's father's very abusive. They're like complete opposites.
Yeah.
And this translates into the conflict between the two fathers bleeds into the two boys.
Exactly. Yes, definitely.
Yes.
Which happens in real life many times, especially with a theme like racism.
Exactly. And the fact that they didn't delve into this really, I think, it needed to be more fleshed out. That was something. So step one of the Hanlon backstory, not enough connection between he and Henry Bowers.
Agreed. Definitely agreed.
The other part of it, taking Bowers out of the equation, was actually changing the family. Like they changed the backstory to where his father and mother had died in a fire, which now became the source of Mike Hanlon's greatest fear.
Yeah.
But the fire element in the novel was a situation that happened to his father when he was a soldier a soldier, and he survived a fire where a lot of people had died. And I thought this was a strange change, because if that becomes the source of your fear, and if there's something that feeds on fear, it doesn't necessarily have to be firsthand experience to be something that terrifies you. Like, they could have kept his backstory and had his father tell him the story about what had occurred, and that could have been enough to spiral his imagination into that dark place.
And it's great that you said that, because that actually touches upon like an entire thing that I didn't really love, were changes that I feel like didn't add to the plot. And didn't like, I just felt like they were unnecessary changes to the point where it was like, you could have done the original idea, and your idea that you used didn't make it better. Like, for instance, that example of, originally in the novel, the entire fire it was the black spot?
The black spot.
The fire at the black spot, it's this really, I mean, some people think that it's not a very scary scene because Pennywise shows its form as a bird, a gigantic bird that's that's like taking people. Let's go back a little bit. Basically, what happened to the black spot is there was this. There was a spot in the neighborhood where in Derry where correct me if I'm wrong. There was a spot in Derry called the Black Spot where black people in that time period would gather, and it became this really like hip place to go.
Yes, because they were not allowed to go in the white clubs.
Exactly.
So they basically turned this shack into this happening nightclub where all the black soldiers went, and it became very popular. But of course, that stirs up racial tensions within the town itself,
and especially with the Bowers family.
Which leads to a racist sect setting fire to this place.
Yeah.
And leading to the deaths of a lot of people.
And Pennywise is there, and he's not a clown, he's a gigantic bird, and he's picking up people. And Mike's father sees this gigantic bird picking up people, and that, I mean, although like, gigantic bird, that doesn't sound scary. I'm sorry, if I was at a place and it was on fire and I saw a gigantic bird picking people up, I'd be like, whoa, what is going on? And that's why when they changed, again, a change that I don't think added, now the fire was about Mike's family dying.
Yes.
I was like, I don't see how that's better.
No, I don't think it was a necessary. in any adaptation, a change for the sake of change I don't like them. I don't.
Yeah.
If you have to like edit for time, or if there's something on a technological level that you don't think you can accomplish, understandable. But a change that you could have easily have just stuck to the original, I'm not a fan of that. I'm
Yeah,
not a fan of
definitely.
that.
And another one of those changes was Ben. Ben being the new kid in town, they kind of made him, since he was new, he wanted to learn about Derry. They made him like the historian. And
Yes.
in the original, in the novel, Mike is
Mike
the historian.
Hanlon is the historian.
Mike is more important in the novel, to me.
Right, especially when you talk about the adult era, because he's the kind of the glue and the catalyst that kind of brings it all together. Because in the 80s, in the present day of the novel, that he's the one that actually remains in the town when everybody else separates.
He stays.
So he's the one that remains to chronicle the events of the town and the town's history with this entity, which is more than a clown.
Which is fitting because in the novel, him being the historian, his father gave him the book.
Yes.
Are they illustrations or are they photos? I don't. I know
Oh,
in the movie, in the Tim Curry movie, they're photos.
Well, there are some illustrations in the original Tim Curry.
Okay.
Because it goes back to a time when they didn't have cameras. The history goes back so
Yes,
far
yes.
that they were I forget what you call it when they like in a newspaper when they used to sketch the image.
Yeah, whatever those are called.
Yeah, there's a
bunch of
name
those.
for it.
But and that's the thing. Like that's why it's so fitting for his character, because his father, having all of this history, handing it down to his son, then for Mike to never leave Derry, to start running the library, a place of resources and history, it just made sense for his character. And obviously we haven't seen part 2 of the 2017 adaptation. I don't know exactly what they're going to do with all of this stuff.
Right.
But again, they made certain changes that I feel like really just weren't necessary. Changed characters to the point where I think that it took away from who that character is, or who they're at least supposed to be. And then, that begs the question, but are they supposed to be? It's an adaptation, someone else's vision. One of, I think, everyone's favorite scenes in every version would be, or every rendition, every adaptation, and the source material, is the scene between Henry Bowers and Ben Hanscom.
This was done very well.
This was done amazing. They did it so much better.
That was like almost shot for shot, book perfect.
Yeah,
almost.
And it happens early in the novel, and it's just such a. It really shows how sick Henry is, because even his friends are, and even in the miniseries, he's like, Henry, don't cut him. Don't actually cut him.
Right.
In this, they just did it. They showed it. They showed the H happening in Ben's stomach. I didn't even need to see that. I kind of didn't even actually want to see that, because the cutting of I would rather see Pennywise teeth enter flesh than a knife. A knife. Oh, there's something about it that I just really don't like. And they actually did the whole losing of the knife thing.
The losing of the knife thing. They did the losing of the knife. They had him kick off of Henry and tumble down into the barrens. I was all about it. And also because you're saying that the cutting of flesh is such just a visceral,
an icky thing.
It's just an icky thing. But the fact, and it's like a 12, 13-year-old kid done by a classmate.
Yeah.
Who was just sick in the head. But the fact that his minions follow him like sheep, even though they know it's that was a great thing that was in the novel, that I'm glad that you got that taste of in this movie.
Absolutely. And speaking of Henry's gang of idiots, I'll just call them, Patrick, man, they didn't do Patrick justice in this at all. But they didn't even mention him at all in the miniseries. But when I knew that he was going to be in this film, I was like, awesome, because they have to be putting him in this adaptation for a reason, and they made him so not important that him being there really didn't make any sense.
Right. It's like you might as well just left the character.
You might have just left him out like the miniseries. But just to talk about that a little bit, if you've seen the original and have not seen this, Patrick is one of Henry's friends who is probably the only one who is more sick than Henry himself.
A genuinely deranged individual.
And I've read a lot about this, again, not just from the novel, but people's opinions online. Henry is affected by his father, his racist, abusive father, and it's him just having a terrible childhood that makes him hurt other people.
Product of his environment.
Patrick is not like that.
Patrick is like a full-blown sociopath.
Yeah,
like an animal maiming, child murdering?
Just Patrick kills his little brother when he's a child, and then goes and watches TV.
Yeah, I believe he smothers his baby brother in a crib because he didn't like the fact that it was taking attention away from him and the affection from his parents.
And that's what's so, he does it for no reason, and that's what makes it like more sick.
Yes, that detachment.
And that's what I'm saying. Like, it goes back to the entire idea of why make the decision to do something if it didn't really add to the story. Okay, let's add Patrick Hockstetter. And let's not do anything that's interesting about Patrick Hockstetter.
No.
You know what I mean? Like, I don't know if that bothered you, but like that, when he dies in his like second scene, I was like, what?
Yeah, and why so early?
Why so early? Like, why didn't we see more of him? The two characters that I think that they did a really good job in changing their story a little bit, but also making them very threatening in a better way than the original made-for-television version. I really loved Mr. Kean, and I really loved Mr. Marsh, and I'll tell you why. So Mr. Kean in the novel, and as they show in the original, I don't know what to call that. What should I call
Miniseries.
it? In the miniseries. In the original miniseries, Mr. Kean's scene is not scary, and it's kind of, at least in the miniseries, it's not scary. I don't think it was really presented well, or that they portrayed it well from the story that we learn in the novel, where Mr. Kean is telling Eddie that he's not really sick. Because, and for those of you who don't know, Eddie is basically a hypochondriac, and the only reason why he is that way is because of his mother. And again, a theme of Derry in the neighborhood that they live in the town that they live in, is that there's something wrong. There's something wrong in the town, and a lot of it has to do with the adults. And one of those adults that's affected is Eddie's mother, telling him that he's sick and telling him that he has asthma when he really doesn't. And Mr. Kean, you would think that he's trying to help Eddie and telling him, listen, that your medicine is a placebo. It's not real medicine, and you're not actually sick. But the way that it's portrayed in the novel, it almost seems like he is kind of doing it in an evil way. He's like trying to ruffle feathers in a way. And the reason why I really loved Mr. Kean is in this version is because they made him super creepy, super creepy in a just really not appropriate way, the way that he speaks to Beverly, and I don't want to ruin that. Well, we're doing spoilers.
Spoilers.
So basically,
spoil all you want.
Tell me, I actually want to hear the way that you would explain how Mr. Kean is in this adaptation.
Kid touchy?
Yes.
But don't misconstrue. He's not a pedophile.
Nor does he touch any kids.
Nor does he touch any kids. It just happens to be that the character of Beverly is blossoming into a young woman. So he's very leery.
Yeah, he's very well, and that's also, I mean, that's a whole other theme, which is the entire theme of over-sexualizing a young woman, which is something that young women deal with all the time.
All the time.
Being objectified, and that is something that character, the Beverly character, in this particular adaptation is going through a lot of, which is actually the second character that I think they did a really good job with was Mr. Marsh, which is Beverly's father. And in the original novel and in the miniseries, he definitely is creepy in the miniseries, and he's definitely not right in the head in the novel.
He's physically abusive.
He's physically abusive.
Yeah,
that actually happens in the novel.
Yes.
And he says very inappropriate things, which is Pennywise kind of acting through his desires.
His actions.
Yeah, and he says a bunch of things that I'm not going to say that would not be appropriate for any adaptation, film adaptation, or for this video. But I think they did a really good job in inferring that. In this adaptation, better than they did in the miniseries.
Yes.
You really got the sense that Mr. Marsh does lust for his own daughter in a very inappropriate way, and it's very scary. That was very scary to me.
But what the difference, I'll tell you the difference between the novel versus the adaptation is that they kind of make it a point that Mr. Marsh is aware of this attraction.
Yes.
And he's trying to he avoids her a little bit more because he realized, because she's she just happens to be, an attractive young woman walking around his house, and it is his daughter, but he's conscious of it, and he tries to avoid those unnatural urges, let's say, where in the in the film adaptation, they took the physical abuse, blended it with that later concept, and actually made him sexually abusive. It's implied that he was sexually abusive to her in the past, which was harsher than it was in the novel itself. But I think it was a in a shorter span of time was able to portray that visceral concept. Quicker.
Yeah, and obviously because they have to tell the story a lot faster.
Yes.
And they actually showed the way that it affected her, which was very upsetting. Like that was just like a stomach churning like part of this adaptation. But again, the reason why I like what they did with that character is because in the original miniseries, he was creepy. He was a weird janitor, but like he didn't scare me, And again, they couldn't do certain things because it was made for television
in 1990.
But I felt like after I read the book, after I saw the miniseries, I was like, oh, wow, there was a lot going on with this character that I didn't know from the miniseries. But now that I do know those things and I saw this new 2017 adaptation, I'm like, I'm glad that they tried to do that in some way that would be appropriate for film, telling that story in an appropriate amount of time. See, that's where I feel like, okay, these are the things that I want to see. It doesn't have to be verbatim. It doesn't have to be exact. It doesn't have to be play for play. But I want to see like Easter eggs from the novel, and not. I don't want to say Easter eggs because that could really mean anything. I want to see development from the novel in the new adaptation.
One of the things about that, Mr. Marsh, that I thought was a little bit more of a takeaway in this new adaptation.
Takeaway isn't a bad thing?
As in a negative.
Or you took it away?
No, as in a negative.
Okay.
Was that despite the fact that I like where they went with that into that dark place, the fact that they didn't infer that it was Pennywise as much in the adaptation.
Yes.
In their ultimate encounter.
Yeah.
That bothered me. I was like, yeah, he's a creep. Yes, this went on, but they should have inferred that more, that he was under the influence of this thing that took it to a point that shouldn't have happened in a normal setting.
Yeah, you're right, because in this adaptation it seems like it's just Mr. Marsh acting out his deepest, darkest desires.
Right.
It's come to a boiling point, and now he's ready to act on it. When in the novel, again, like I mentioned earlier, there's something wrong in Derry, and again, has a lot to do with the adults. And a lot of the times, if not all or most of the times, it's Pennywise influencing the adults, the parents. And the children all feel, like they're being betrayed, or they feel like they're being treated unfairly, or the world's against them,
or ignored, like their pleas for help are just falling on deaf ears, and it's swept under the rug. Like there's a plot concept in the novel, in the adaptions, where that like Derry has their murder rate in that town is 6 times the size of the national average, but it's this quiet little New England town and no one's talking about it.
Yeah.
Children disappear constantly, but why isn't it in the newspaper?
Yeah.
Things like that, and it gets swept under the rug, and it's not because the townsfolk are bad people, it's because the town of Derry is under this miasma of this influence of this thing. And it makes it a sick place. Going back to Asthma Eddie.
Yeah.
Go back to Asthma Eddie, where it comes from his father.
Eddie Spaghetti.
Eddie Spaghetti. His father had either left or died. I think he might have.
I don't remember.
I don't remember if he abandoned the family, but
he's not in the picture.
He's not in the picture. But Eddie's mother is so afraid to lose him that she has put her own psychoses onto Eddie, which has turned him into this afraid hypochondriac creature, which is her sick way of keeping him on a leash. But has hampered him in his development.
Now, about the Casbracks, though, here's where in this version I loved Eddie, and I didn't really like the mother.
You didn't like the depiction of the mother?
I didn't like the depiction of the mother. Okay. And that's just a very quick thing. That's actually supposed to be in my opinion, a very serious part. Her hold on Eddie and him realizing it. And in this they made it funny. With and these are gazebos,
which was a funny line.
Yeah, no, it was. Don't get me wrong, I laughed. It was great, but they kind of took a scene and they changed the tone of it. Which was it appropriate? Sure, right. Absolutely. Did it work? Yes, But it was, in my opinion, reading that part. I mean, people go through that. People go through, being under the manipulation of their parents.
Yes.
But that being said,
Yeah.
I loved Eddie Kazbrak in this because in the miniseries, he's a very nervous person. He is a hypochondriac. He is also, he's timid, he's small, he's the tiniest of them all, and he acts that part. In this, they took him and they gave him like Napoleon complex. Like he cursed the most. He was very funny. And it's very obvious that he is an amazing actor. It's very obvious that he knows what he's doing.
This kid
in front of the camera
might be my favorite portrayal of one of the kids in the movie is Eddie, I believe. And the sidebar that Bill Skarsgard, who plays Pennywise, he in an interview he did.
I love this. Yeah, I know exactly what
he was talking about how he was. They had isolated him from the kids so that when he was as Pennywise, it was going to be very new and creepy to them. And he was talking about working with the actor that played Eddie, and it was his first scene together, and it was an intense scene, and he's bearing down on the kid, and the kid freaked out, and he did the scene very well. And Bill
He's
Skarsgård,
crying,
and Bill Skarsgård thought that he went too far, and he said, but on the turn of a dime.
When they said cut,
the kid turns around and goes, "You're doing a great job. I like what you're doing with the character." And all of a sudden, he's an actor.
Bill is the leader, and Bill is, in the miniseries and in the novel, he rides Silver. He's the one leading. He's the one who actually partakes or is involved or is one of the fighting forces in the ritual of Chud. But in this particular film, they really played on the way that a death affects a family member.
Yes.
And Bill, the way that, because of his stutter, which he did really great.
Yeah, which is got to be hard to do.
I almost see him more as the original Eddie character because he's so timid and he's so guarded. He's just when I hear the way that he speaks and some of the lines that he delivers, he's such a sensitive personality that there were parts in the movie where I was like, this kid could have also played Eddie. I'm not saying he's a bad Bill. He's a great Bill, but he could have also played Eddie very well. I think if they did that, they would have had to make the rest of the cast maybe a little taller. But no, don't get me wrong. He was great. He was definitely. I mean, I saw him as a leader. There were just things that he did that just reminded me of if this was made back during the miniseries, he might have been cast as Eddie Kazbrak.
That is possible. What something they changed about him, which kind of led to that sensitivity, was that in the original novel, when his younger brother Georgie is killed, which kicks off the whole story. Spoilers.
In every version.
In every version. But when Georgie dies, he dies. There's a funeral, they have his body, and he's gone.
Yes.
Where in this movie, they changed it to where they never found Georgie, so Bill is in denial that Georgie is actually gone. So where in the novel, etc., he's trying to find the killer in that sense. In this, he was actually trying to find his brother. And the other children had to walk on eggshells talking about it with him.
And something that I loved that they did was the hamster tube scene.
Oh, yes.
I loved that because that's exactly a child's mind. That's exactly what a kid would do. They would think about it very hard, and they would come up with a way to figure out the answer. And maybe it's like an impractical answer in an adult's mind.
In an adult's mind.
But to a kid, listen, this action figure, when I spray the hose through this tube, ends up in a different part of the town. That's exactly what could have happened to Georgie. That's it's a genius, just a point of view. It's a genius way to portray a child's mind and how it works. I thought that was great. And I don't know if anyone else in the theater felt the same way. They might have thought that scene was funny, like, oh, look at this kid. But I was like, this is exactly what I would have done. What did you think of the painting, the woman in the painting? What did you think of that?
I mean, it's creepy.
Is it, though?
I mean, if it's something that he's afraid of. Now, I'm trying to think back. What was his... Oh, it was the dead children.
Yeah, by the standpipe.
By the standpipe.
Yeah.
Now, Stan, we were talking about before, Stan, his character probably had the most chopped out of it.
Yes.
He in the novel is the one we are least familiar with, mainly because spoilers, he's the only one not with the group as an adult. So the only way we experience Stan is through their experience with him as children. So he's also the one we don't get as much time with. So that translated into the movie as well, but that also it meant that you kind of lost the parts where you did experience him. So his whole experience with Pennywise was everybody's was completely altered. But I can understand what you're saying. It wasn't what it was in the novel. It wasn't as powerful as it was in the novel.
So we're gonna go into facepalm mode, and what I mean by that is, so it was funny. I went to go see another scary or like thrill. I went to go see Annabelle a few weeks before.
Okay.
A few weeks before it came out.
I've not seen Annabelle.
And they showed the entire Georgie sewer scene up to the point where Georgie goes to reach.
Right.
And it was the first time I saw the full scene. I had only seen like clips online. And I was like, okay, this looks cool. It definitely could go in a great direction. I go to see the movie and I'm watching the scene again. And there were even like a little bit more lines than were in what I saw that Pennywise delivered. And then it happened. Pennywise opened up his mouth, and the first shot, the side profile of him opening his mouth with it seems like practical effects of the teeth coming out. It might be CGI. I was like, okay, they're going to actually show like it's a different type of fangs than what I'm used to seeing of Pennywise with just like kind of like sharp teeth in his mouth. I was like, oh, so there's like fangs that like come out, and then the bite scene happened, where you see Pennywise's head actually connect with Georgie. And that was the first time that I facepalmed. Because I was like, oh no, the CGI was terrible. Like, it just looked awful. I'm sorry, that scene looked terrible to me. And the reason why I was disappointed is because I knew that this set the tone and the precedent for what I was going to see for the rest of the film. And it might not be the next scene, but you see the woman in the painting. And when that happened, I was like, oh, come on. This is what I was waiting for. Like, don't get me wrong, some of the CGI was cool, some of it was great. Like when he comes out, I think it's like a safe or like a cabinet where he comes out to Eddie.
His body was all contorted.
Yeah, and he does that whole like the Cell performance, like and it's all,
where he kind of like unravels.
Where he unravels himself. That was great. That was awesome, and I'm sure before the CGI was put in there, that Bill Skarsgård did a really great job acting that out. Which is, by the way, I think the scene between him and Eddie that he's talking about in that interview. I think that's that scene. But other parts, like the painting, that and a lot of the time where he moves, I know that was a stylized that was a choice that they made where they animated him like really weird, like where he's chasing Ben in the library. I like almost chuckled. It looked silly to me. Like, it just didn't look scary.
Well, are you talking about like the almost stutter step effect?
Yeah, where he's like kind of just like shaking, and then he does the shaking in the basement. I'm like, why is he shaking? Like, I just didn't understand why when he attacks he shakes.
I think that was kind of a stylized choice, kind of like going back to the Japanese horror movies like The Grudge or things like that. And I think that's kind of maybe what they were trying to invoke from a stylized perspective.
Yeah.
I get it, but it didn't. But like that's one of those things where I didn't think it was that bad. Like going back to like the Georgie scene, right? Not the greatest CGI from a like a green screen perspective, but I liked the design of what they did though, because like if you go to the novel, for example, it just describes that his face changed and whatever he turned into, the visual of that shattered Georgie's mind, and it was something twisted. So yeah, we got the practical effect in the miniseries, but that's very open to interpretation.
Yeah, I mean Georgie's a kid, man. He hasn't seen a lot.
No, but so the weird like unhinged jaw and all the jagged teeth, which I use all the time. I thought that was a cool design. Maybe you didn't love the the overlay.
Yeah, it was literally the overlay. Like it just looked terrible, and I understand like why his eyes like move kind of like he has how he lazy eye.
I dug that. I kind of dug the unfocused eyes, which I don't think were in the trailers. I think that was like a post-production thing that they did, but I actually like that strange, like eyes almost looking in two opposite directions.
I actually read, and it could be, everything is speculation when you read like a picture with a caption. There's no I don't know who wrote that, but somebody said that Bill Skarsgard was actually able to do that himself.
I knew somebody that was able to do it, but it hurt them to do it, so they didn't do it a lot.
Oh man!
So if he actually did it for that role, holy crap! See, some things they did so well. Like for example, in the miniseries, they didn't do Neibolt Street at all. I don't think.
Well, they brought a house that just appears in a park.
Yeah,
it stands flashback. Yeah, it's weird.
So that was one thing they left out, but they did the Neibolt Street pretty well in this movie. But then on the flip side, something that the miniseries did that this movie did not is Beverly, with how she becomes their weapon.
Yeah,
she becomes their warrior against Pennywise because they decide they all together know that this thing can take the form of a werewolf. So lending to that belief, they're like, well, silver kills werewolves, which is where that whole concept of the silver comes in. And so they know that somebody needs to shoot it. They bring in a slingshot. Beverly's the best shot.
Yeah.
And she becomes the warrior for the team in that regard. And they relegated her to a damsel in distress.
Yeah.
Oh, that bothered me so much.
Yeah, that was... And that's what I'm talking about. Like, don't make decisions like... Did that add anything to the movie? Did it?
No.
At all? Like, was that necessary? Like, maybe they were like, well, we need for them to have a reason to go back. No.
They had a reason to go back.
They had a reason to go back.
To stop this thing from killing children.
Stop this thing from killing children, mostly themselves.
Right. And revenge for the murder of Bill's brother.
And Beverly was like, she was, yeah, you're right. She was the warrior. She's very important. So I'll just like if it was between 1 and 20, I would give it like a 14. Like I definitely liked it more than halfway. I think that the performances were great. I think Bill Skarsgard literally did the best he could. I think that his performance was riddled with terrible CGI, which is not his fault at all.
Not his fault?
Not his fault. I think the kids obviously did a great job. I just wish that the story was a little bit more in tune with what I think is great about the original story. And that being said, the original director, and I don't know if you've read about this, but this was supposed to get made a while ago, and it was canceled.
Oh.
And the only person who was in the original cast was Finn Wolfhard.
Oh, really?
And what happened was, I mean, I can't state the source. This is all me reading online. They cast him, and then like Stranger Things happened, and then they brought him back. But that being said, the original director went off the project. I don't know if he quit or he was kicked off the project, but basically from what I think that I remember from the article was that he was trying to make the movie that I think I wanted to see. And the studio was like, this needs to be a horror movie. It needs to be scary. I mean, there is speculation on my part, but that's what it's, because obviously we're not going to know the actual what happened fact for fact. Mm-hmm. But that's what seems like what was happening. It was supposed to be a different type of movie, and I think that we just didn't, and that it was supposed to be the one that I wanted to see, and I think that we just got a different version that was more classic horror, and that's what we have. So 14 for me. What about you?
I would say I would agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
I'll give it around that, and that's not really a negative. Like I said, some of the downside, small changes that they made that were unnecessary. Again, I think a movie was not the way to go about it, but I enjoyed the movie. I enjoyed the movie. Like this kept me for what it was. I didn't go like, oh man, I don't like what they did here.
Like I was like this.
No,
in the
see,
movie
like no,
theater, like,
see,
oh,
like,
man.
I felt like, even though it's a much more diluted version of the story, I still felt that they did their best to invoke the sense of it, that the emotion for it. Like when I watched it, I was like, this is how I kind of feel about like Derry and the characters. Like I'm kind of there more, where like the original miniseries didn't do that for me, and I felt like this captured the connotation of it more for me.
The evil sensibility of Derry.
Or in general, even Pennywise himself, where a lot of Tim Curry was the clown.
Yeah.
And then where this, I felt like even though it was the clown, you always got the feeling of the creature behind it. Like you always knew that was a facade.
I'll agree with you in that. I think that that's definitely true. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that so many people have read it now, so many people have seen the miniseries, that they decided, it would be a good idea to really focus on the fact that he's not a clown.
Which is the book. The book is like that. I mean, the
book is more omnipotent. And
Yeah.
in the book, there are scenes that are literally, there are parts of the book where it's in his point of view.
Oh, yeah. To later points, you actually do get some of the perspective of this thing that's pissed that these kids are threatening it.
Yeah. He hates them. So I would say, I think this was great. I think this was a great conversation to have. And the reason why I wanted to do this again is because I haven't read the book in quite a while. Nick read it very recently, and I just wanted to get, another person's point of view. Maybe there are things that, is unfair on my part, or things that I didn't remember or I interpreted differently. So thank you so much for coming. Maybe we'll do this again on another movie that we see or something that comes out.
Thank you for having me, and I recommend everyone see the movie and form your own opinions about it.
Yes, and then once you do, read the book.
Read the book.
Guys, thank you so much. You can visit me on YouTube. Hopefully you're watching this on YouTube. Or you can find me on Instagram. It's instagram.com/geekleveliasian. If you're on the web, I don't know why you would do that. If you're on your Instagram app, which is where most people would be, at Geek Level Asian, you can find me on Twitter, same handle. Thank you so much for joining, and we'll see you next time.